I was still on the call when his hand found my thigh. Muted my camera off. My husband's voice echoing faintly from the speaker as he explained quarterly numbers like nothing in the world could possibly be wrong. Like my body wasn't suddenly on fire. I didn't move. I barely breathed. I was sitting at the small desk in our guest room, laptop balanced on a stack of books, pretending to take notes. The blue glow of the screen washed over my hands, steady, professional. If anyone on the call could see me, they'd think I was focused, responsible, faithful. They couldn't see him. He stood just behind me, close enough that I could feel the warmth of his body without looking, close enough that the air between us felt charged, tight, dangerous. He hadn't said a word since he walked in, just closed the door quietly, too quietly. His fingers rested there like they belonged, heavy, certain, not moving, not yet, just enough pressure to make my pulse stutter. I swallowed and kept my eyes on the screen. Someone asked me a question. My name spoken casually, professionally, by a coworker who had no idea my entire nervous system was unraveling. I answered smoothly, voice calm, even as my thoughts scattered like startled birds. Under the desk, my knee trembled. I tried to still it, tried to remember how to sit like nothing was happening, tried not to think about the fact that I was married, that I was supposed to be alone in this room, that the door was closed and locked and he knew exactly what he was doing. His thumb moved just slightly, a slow, deliberate shift that sent a wave of heat straight through me. I stared at my wedding ring, catching the light as my hand hovered over the keyboard. It felt heavier than usual, like it was watching me. Behind me, I felt him lean closer. His breath brushed my ear, barely there, like a thought I wasn't supposed to have. I didn't turn around. I didn't tell him to stop. And that was the moment I knew this call wasn't the most dangerous thing happening in that room. I should explain how he ended up there. In that room. Behind me. Because it didn't start with touch. It never does. It started weeks earlier with proximity. With shared silence. With noticing the same things at the same time. He worked with me, same company, different department. Not someone I was supposed to want. Not someone I ever planned to let this close. First it was harmless. Coffee refills at the same time. Lingering glances that lasted half a second too long. Conversations that drifted away from work and into quieter, more dangerous territory. Things we didn't say sitting heavier than the things we did. I told myself it was nothing. I told myself I was married. My husband is a good man. Steady. Predictable in a way that once made me feel safe. Our life is orderly, responsible. We talk about schedules and groceries and plans for someday. Somewhere along the way, my body stopped being part of the conversation. I didn't notice how hungry I was until someone else saw it. He saw it. The first time our hands brushed, it felt like an accident, but my skin remembered it for hours. The first time our eyes locked in the hallway, something inside me tilted, like I'd stepped too close to an edge. We never touched again. Not until today. He wasn't supposed to come over. He said he just needed to drop off a file. 5 minutes tops. I hesitated at the door longer than I should have. I let him in anyway. Now here we were. Still on the call. Still pretending everything was normal. His hand hadn't moved away. If anything, it felt more deliberate now, like he was waiting to see what I'd do. Testing the space I hadn't defended. I felt split in two, one version of me nodding along to budget forecasts, the other acutely aware of every breath, every inch of heat behind me. I could have ended the call. I didn't. I could have stood up. I stayed right where I was. And somewhere between those choices, I realized this wasn't just temptation anymore. It was consent unfolding quietly. The longer his hand stayed there, the harder it became to pretend it was accidental. My body had already made its decision. My mind was still scrambling to catch up. I adjusted in my chair, a subtle shift meant to create space, but it did the opposite. My movement pressed me closer to him, and I felt the quiet acknowledgement of it in the way his fingers curved, adapting, claiming, not grabbing, just present, as if he were reminding me he could feel every reaction I failed to hide. On the call, someone laughed. A harmless joke. I smiled at the screen like I was part of it, even as my heartbeat started to sound too loud in my own ears. I wondered irrationally if the microphone could somehow hear that. If they could hear the way my breath had gone shallow. Behind me, he bent slightly, close enough that his chest brushed my shoulder. The contact was fleeting but intentional. I felt it down my spine like a whispered promise. "Still muted," he murmured, barely a sound. Not even words, really, more like breath shaped into confidence. My fingers tightened around the pen in my hand. I should have stood up then. I should have pushed his hand away, turned around, reminded him of every reason this was wrong. Of the ring on my finger. Of the voice in my ear that belonged to someone who trusted me. Instead, I stayed still. Under the desk, his thumb traced a slow, absent line. Nothing bold, nothing obvious. The kind of touch that could be denied if anyone ever asked. The kind that lived entirely in implication. My thoughts fractured. I remembered the way he looked at me when he thought I wasn't watching. Like he saw something in me I'd forgotten how to access. Like he knew exactly how thin my restraint had become. "Can you take that, please?" my husband's voice said through the speaker. I straightened instantly, forced my voice steady as I answered. Professional. Controlled. If anyone was listening closely, they'd hear nothing but competence. But my body told a different story. Heat gathered low and insistent. My skin felt too sensitive, every nerve awake and alert. I was hyper-aware of the space between us, how small it was, how easily it could disappear. His hand didn't move away. It slid just an inch. Enough to make my breath hitch. He was patient. Dangerous in the way he waited. And I was starting to realize the most reckless part wasn't his touch. It was how badly I wanted him to keep going. Time stretched in strange ways after that. Every second on the call felt louder, sharper. The sound of typing. The polite interruptions. The rhythm of voices rising and falling while my entire focus narrowed to the place where his hand rested. Warm and impossibly steady. I could feel him smiling behind me. Not because he was amused, but because he knew. He knew I wasn't going to stop him. He knew I was listening to two conversations at once and losing control of both. I felt a shift in the air as he leaned in closer. His presence no longer something I could pretend was accidental. His knee brushed the back of my chair. His breath lingered near my hair, slow and unhurried, like he had nowhere else to be. I stared at the screen, blinking too slowly. The call leader was sharing slides now. Numbers. Charts. Everyone's attention was supposed to be there. Mine was unraveling instead. Pulled apart by sensation and fear, and something that felt dangerously like relief. His fingers pressed more firmly, just for a moment. Not enough to leave a mark. Enough to send a clear message. "You feel this too." My lips parted on a breath I hadn't meant to take. I forced myself to inhale quietly, terrified of making a sound. The room felt smaller by the second. The desk. The chair. The closed door behind us. I thought about the fact that if I turned my head even slightly, my cheek would brush his shoulder. That if I stood up, I'd be standing inside his space. That the only thing keeping this from becoming something irreversible was stillness. And stillness was failing me. He shifted again, closer, until I could feel the solid line of his body along my back. Not pressing. Just there. A silent invitation that made my stomach tighten. "Relax," he breathed, so softly it could have been my imagination. I didn't answer. On the call, my husband cleared his throat, said my name again, asked if I agreed with the proposal. "Yes," I said instantly, voice steady, betraying nothing. But my hand shook as I set the pen down. I felt exposed. Split open by the contrast of it all, the normalcy in my ears, the slow burn behind me. The weight of my choices pressing down. Heavier with every heartbeat. His hand slid again. Another inch. Another quiet test. I closed my eyes for half a second. That was all it took. When I opened them, I knew this wasn't about resisting anymore. It was about how far I was willing to fall without making a sound. The call dragged on, merciless in its normalcy. I answered questions. I nodded when someone spoke, even though no one could see me. My body was doing something else entirely, counting breaths, tracking the smallest shifts behind me, bracing for each quiet escalation. His hand was no longer pretending to be still. It moved in slow, almost thoughtful patterns, like he was learning the shape of my reactions. Every time my breath caught, he paused. Every time I steadied myself, he continued. It felt intentional, intimate, like a conversation happening under the surface of everything else. I pressed my feet flat against the floor, grounding myself, trying to remember where I was. Guest room. Desk. Laptop. Ring on my finger. Husband's voice in my ear. None of it felt strong enough. He leaned in again, closer this time, until his chin hovered near my shoulder. I could feel the heat of him, the quiet control in the way he refused to rush. My skin reacted before I could stop it. A shiver I prayed didn't show. "You're doing so well," he whispered. The words hit harder than the touch. I swallowed, throat tight, and kept my eyes on the screen. My name appeared in the corner of the video grid. A small muted icon beside it. Safe. Or so it seemed. I realized then how exposed I really was. Not just physically but emotionally. How much I wanted the attention. The focus. The way he was watching me unravel and treating it like something precious. On the call, someone suggested wrapping up early. Panic flared sharp and sudden. If the call ended, there would be no excuse anymore. No thin barrier of professionalism. No reason for him to stay quiet, careful. The tension that had been stretched so exquisitely thin would snap. I didn't know whether I wanted that or feared it more. His hand slid once more, deliberate, confident. I bit the inside of my lip to keep from making a sound. My heart pounded so hard I was sure he could feel it through my skin. "Almost done," my husband said, voice warm, familiar. Behind me I felt him smile. Not because it was ending, but because he knew what came next. And the most terrifying part was this. I didn't want him to stop when the call finally did. The call ended with the soft, unmistakable click of finality. For half a second nothing happened. No voices. No slides. No reason left to pretend. The silence pressed in on us, thick and intimate, broken only by the quiet hum of my laptop fan. I stayed frozen, hands resting on the desk, eyes still fixed on the screen as if it might suddenly come back to life and save me from what I'd already allowed. Behind me he didn't move either. That was the cruelest part, the restraint. The way he let the moment breathe. Let the reality of it settle into my bones. The call was over. I was no longer protected by distance or distraction. Slowly, deliberately, his hand tightened just enough to remind me it was still there. I exhaled, the breath shaky despite my best efforts. "You didn't stop me," he said quietly. It wasn't an accusation. It wasn't a question. I closed my eyes. "I couldn't," I admitted, the words barely louder than a thought. He shifted then, stepping closer until there was no space left to negotiate. I felt him behind me, solid and unavoidable, his presence wrapping around my hesitation like it had been waiting for this exact moment. I turned in my chair, finally looking at him. The intensity in his gaze stole what little resolve I had left. There was no triumph there. No rush. Just a steady, dangerous calm. As if he understood exactly what this cost me and wanted me anyway. "You're shaking," he murmured. I was. My hands. My breath. Everything I'd been holding together unraveling now that there was no one left to hear me fall apart. He lifted his hands, slow, careful, giving me time to pull away. I didn't. Instead, I leaned into the touch just slightly. Enough to tell him the truth my mouth was too afraid to say. The kiss didn't happen all at once. It began with hesitation. With closeness. With breath shared in that fragile space where guilt and longing collide. When his forehead touched mine, I felt something break open inside my chest. Fear, desire, relief, all tangled together. When our lips finally met, it was quiet. Unrushed. Heavy with everything we hadn't said. And as I closed my eyes and let myself feel it, one thought echoed louder than all the others. There was no muting this anymore. After that first kiss, nothing rushed forward the way I expected. We stayed there, close enough to feel everything but careful, almost reverent. Like we both understood that what we were doing wasn't about speed or hunger alone. It was about the weight of the line we had crossed, and how quietly it had happened. His hands framed my face, steadying me. Not claiming. Grounding. My breath came uneven, my thoughts scattered between what I was feeling and what I was about to lose. "I should stop," I whispered. He didn't answer right away. Instead, his forehead rested against mine again. A pause heavy with respect and restraint. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, controlled. "Then tell me to." I didn't. The silence answered for me. I stood up slowly, my chair scraping softly against the floor, the sound absurdly loud in the stillness. Standing only made the closeness more intense. There was nowhere for the tension to go now. It wrapped around us, tight and undeniable. I could feel his breath change as I moved closer. The way his composure shifted just slightly. It made something inside me ache. Not just with desire, but with the strange intimacy of being seen so clearly in a moment I'd never planned for. His hand found mine. Our fingers laced together instinctively, like they'd been reaching for each other long before this room, before this afternoon. The kiss deepened, not desperate, not frantic. Slow. Intentional. The kind of kiss that feels like a decision being made with every breath. Somewhere in the back of my mind, guilt pressed in. My husband's voice from earlier echoed faintly, a reminder of the life waiting just beyond this door. The normalcy. The safety. But here in this suspended moment, all I felt was how awake I was. How present. How impossible it felt to pull away from something that had already taken root inside me. When we finally parted, my lips tingled, my chest tight with emotion I didn't know how to name. "This changes everything," I said softly. He nodded. No denial. No promises. "I know." And in that quiet acknowledgement, I realized the most dangerous thing wasn't what we'd done. It was how deeply I knew I would remember this moment. Long after we walked away from it. We didn't go any further. That's the part people always expect to change, but it didn't. Instead, we stood there in the aftermath of what we'd already undone, breathing the same air, feeling the echo of our closeness settle into something quieter and heavier. Like the room itself was holding on to us, memorizing the shape of what almost happened. He stepped back first. Not abruptly. Not coldly. Just enough to give the moment its edges again. I felt the loss of his warmth instantly. It startled me how deep that ache went. "This can't become more," I said, finally letting the truth surface. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. He nodded once. Slowly. Like someone who already knew the answer but needed to hear it anyway. "I know," he said. "But it already matters." That was the most dangerous sentence of all. He left quietly, the door clicking shut behind him with the same care he'd used when he arrived. The sound lingered long after his footsteps faded, sealing the room back into its ordinary shape. I sat down again at the desk, staring at my dark screen. My reflection stared back, eyes brighter than they had any right to be, alive in a way that scared me. A few minutes later, my phone buzzed. A message from my husband. Something mundane. Something loving. I typed back like nothing had happened. That night, lying beside him, I stared at the ceiling and replayed the moment over and over. Not the kiss, not the touch, but the silence before it all broke open. The second when I could still have chosen differently. Some moments don't ruin your life. They just divide it. And sometimes the most intimate thing that ever happens to you is a hand on your thigh, while the whole world is still listening.